think I'm gone maybe a little too red in the shadow now that I'm comparing it to the light and I have a little more to work with. So I'm going to make sure on some of these roses that I push it a little bit towards the yellow and green. Because I think I went a little too red with them. So I want to just make sure I correct that. Because they're warm, but they're not red warm. Not like an intense warm red. They're a little more on the neutral side. That's a little better, just kind of bringing in some greens and yellows into that to adjust the color. And I really want these flowers in the back to fall into shadow and really feel like there's distance between the front roses and these roses back here, and atmosphere almost to it. So I'm gonna work it into the shadow and lose a lot of the edges since they almost just fall completely into the shadow. And then I might just bring a couple pieces of light back in to define them. And I think this painting is going to have more of a classical look to it, especially with the more intense lighting that's falling on the front roses and how they're pretty much neutral and white flowers. So it's fun to experiment because if you go with brighter colors, you might get more of an impressionistic feel to it. So it's fun to mix up your subject matter and try different things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm gonna get the stem in, which is a pretty important shape to get in, so it really reads as the rose. And I think trying to get a couple in there somewhere helps a lot, because I've found that if I'm working on a floral or a still life and there's flowers in it and there aren't any visible stems or leaves or anything like that, it kind of feels like they're floating sometimes and they aren't attached to anything. So that's an important part, to still pay attention to the stems and the petals and the leaves, of getting those greens right and paying attention to that, because a lot of the time you get so caught up in getting the actual flower itself in that we kind of forget to give attention to the stem and the leaves around it. You get a couple of the outer petal shapes in for this flower in the center. Comes up like that, and then it comes across here. And up. And I'm going to get a little darker towards the core of the rose where it's really in shadow and there's barely any light coming in, any reflected light or anything like that. So kind of down in there, gets much darker, and then there's a petal that's catching the light right here. I'm just going to measure up from the bottom of the rose to where that petal is and see. So it's about a third up from the bottom. So somewhere right in here should be good. Get a couple of the petals defined on this rose. And up here. And then one here. I'm going to try and keep a lot of these shadow shapes grouped together, but I still want to define the outer edge a little bit so it doesn't feel like a giant clump, but I'll try and simplify it a little bit. Just like that. Maybe in here, put a little bit of a dark. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say a lot of the times I like to, instead of breaking up a shape, like here, it in the reference, there might be a little bit more of a gap, a larger gap right here, but I'm going to try and keep the shadow connected because it's so close that I can kind of just push it a little bit together. So if I can keep that shape together, it can kind of feel like a larger mass as opposed to breaking it up too much, where then it becomes a bunch of complicated shapes. So connecting some shadow shapes together and light shapes together can really help simplify things, especially when they're, oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. There's a little bit of reflected light from this light here that's hitting this rose up into the shadow here, but I don't want to overstate it. Just keep it very subtle. Because it's easy to go too light with reflected light because it's still going to be in the shadow family. So you want to keep it subdued because it's easy to put too vibrant of colors or make it too light in the reflected light, but you can kind of lose your shadow if you do that. Yeah. 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 And that's a really common mistake that I still make quite a bit because you see like a really vibrant color and you're like, oh, I'm going to put this in really vibrant, really light, and then you kind of lose your shadow when you do that because it breaks it up and it messes with the way the light normally flows. Yep, just a touch because I'm seeing it a little cooler because those carnations are a cooler flower than the roses. Okay, so I think I'm just going to get a couple more things defined and then I'm going to flip it in the mirror to see if the drawing and values are accurate because that will help me see it with fresh eyes and a lot of things will jump out if they're wrong. I'm going to get this rose back here, just a hint of definition. It's in from that. So it lands about here. And then it falls into the shadow. It's going to be a little warmer on the shadow side and darker. It's getting just a hint of this light, so it still has a light side and shadow side, but it's not as intense as the foreground flowers. Just going to double check the drawing on this angle. Comes over just a little more. Maybe I'll just define one petal here. So it comes up. And then push this over just a little bit.